An FBI agent ousted over questionable connections is now exposing what appears to be a political purge at the highest levels. Is a bureau safeguarding American interests or simply its own? Breaking news today.
Hello and welcome to That News Show, where we discuss the latest facts, fakes, and hypocrisy as reported by the legacy media. Let's roll the tape.
Is this truly a matter of national security, or are we witnessing a purge of dissent and an enforcement of ideological conformity? We must pause and question, when did it become taboo to examine the motives of our intelligence agencies? BuzzNBC reports that an ousted FBI agent has spoken out against Director Kash Patel and Deputy Director Dan Bongino. Tonight, we dig into the story of an FBI agent allegedly forced out for associating with the wrong colleagues, landing on a so-called enemies list. Here we go again.
And so that weekend, Bongino informed my special agent in charge, who in turn informed me that he was halting and actually reversing my professional advancement. Feinberg adds on the nature of his friendship with Pete Strzok this, quote, "If the fact that I sang along to Every Day is Like Sunday while he stood next to me at a Morrissey concert actually represents an imminent danger to the Bureau's integrity, then for the first time in nearly half century on this earth, I'm truly at a loss for words." And if there are any questions as to whether or not the people who are being ousted at the FBI are the selfless public servants who should fill the nation's top law enforcement agency, here's this from Feinberg's resignation letter. Quote, "I love my country and our Constitution with a fervor that mere language will not allow me to articulate. And it pains me that my profession will no longer entail being..."
Recent revelations suggest a troubling pattern within the FBI of ideological purges and politically motivated retaliation. For instance, a respected agent like Feinberg, known for his impeccable record, was sidelined due to his personal connections, notably with Pete Strzok, a figure controversial in his own right. It is also notable that the previous administration, under Biden and Harris, failed to address these abuses, instead maintaining a system that favored their allies and penalized their critics. Feinberg's mention of a culture of fear is not a new phenomenon. Networks like MSNBC often defend the bureaucracy rather than promoting accountability, portraying whistleblowers and dissenters as troublemakers instead of recognizing them as patriots. The crisis of trust in federal law enforcement is deepening, affecting not only conservatives, but anyone who values the rule of law and genuine accountability. Under previous Democratic administrations, the bureaucratic elite in Washington seemed to entrench themselves, prioritizing political loyalty over core duties like law enforcement and counterterrorism. The only path forward is through transparency, accountability, and a recommitment to the principles that have historically upheld this nation's greatness. The erosion of trust in our institutions is a national crisis that go beyond partisan lines. Such actions do not aim to improve the FBI, but rather to consolidate power and suppress opposition, reflecting a globalist and interventionist mindset that has led to endless foreign conflicts and compromised our sovereignty. Ultimately, when loyalty to the Constitution and the country is supplanted by allegiance to a political faction, everyone suffers. The shift from fundamental responsibilities to loyalty tests undermines the foundation of impartial justice and diverts resources from vital national security tasks to less critical areas, such as immigration enforcement, while neglecting white-collar crime and public corruption.
Their servant. As you know, my wife and I are expecting our first child this summer, and this decision will entail no small degree of hardship for us. But as our organization began to decay, I made a vow that I would comport myself in a manner that would allow me to look my son in the eye as I raised him. It is now apparent that I can no longer both fulfill that vow and continue working for our current leadership. That is where we start the hour with former Assistant Special Agent in charge at the FBI, Michael Feinberg. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Your piece stopped me in my tracks. I read the whole thing, which took a bit, but it was the first window into what's really happening at the FBI. And I wonder if you can just share with our viewers what happened to you at Kash Patel's FBI.
When dedicated FBI agent Michael Feinberg resigned due to a clash between his personal values and the Bureau's direction, it highlighted a serious issue within our federal institutions. What we are witnessing is not merely a failure of leadership at the FBI, but a broader warning about the dangers of unchecked federal power and the consequences of prioritizing political loyalty over constitutional duty. Feinberg was marginalized and faced demotion for maintaining a friendship with someone deemed politically undesirable by current leadership. This isn't just bureaucratic overreach. It's an attack on the principles of fairness and due process that should underpin American justice. This lack of honest oversight is not only irresponsible but also dangerous, particularly as another election cycle looms, putting the impartiality of law enforcement under intense scrutiny. This internal purge drives out dissenters, leaving only the compliant, and marks a dangerous shift in priorities. The alarming new reality is that promotions and job security are increasingly dependent on ideological loyalty rather than competence or experience. The American people deserve more than a bureaucracy that polices thoughts and associations. They deserve leaders committed to restoring transparency and accountability to our most powerful institutions. Instead of focusing on genuine national security threats, resources are diverted from essential counterterrorism efforts to high-profile immigration enforcement, even in areas where illegal immigration poses little threat. The dismantling of public corruption squads and the neglect of politically sensitive cases further undermine public trust and leave real crimes unaddressed.
The FBI, as I repeatedly reminded the people I supervised in Norfolk, is an organization under the executive branch. And the chief executive, the president, does have the right to choose whatever investigative priorities he or she wants. As long as there is a law in the books that was dutifully enacted and signed into the U.S. Code by the president, like, we don't get to say no if that's what they want enforced. My issues with the way that the FBI is approaching immigration enforcement is simply that nobody's actually had a hard conversation about what the opportunity costs of shifting personnel and resources to that violation means for other areas of investigation. The FBI hasn't had a budget or personnel increase in quite some time. Kash Patel actually recently acquiesced to yet another budget cut for us.
For instance, their coverage of the Norfolk field office's warnings before January 6th was overshadowed by speculation about right-wing extremism, paying little heed to leadership failures in Washington to respond to credible intelligence. MSNBC favors former officials who support the status quo and seldom invites voices that challenge the prevailing narrative or have direct experiences of the agency's politicization. This overlooks a deeper issue. It's not about whether the president can set these priorities, but whether they serve as a pretext to neglect crucial law enforcement duties for the sake of political optics. The absence of transparent debate about the trade-offs involved when agents are reassigned exposes much. Instead of open discussions, there's bureaucratic maneuvering and a culture where dissent is stifled and expertise is undervalued. The assertion that the FBI must follow the president's investigative priorities as part of the executive branch is technically correct. True accountability demands confronting uncomfortable truths, not only within the agency but also from the media tasked with holding it accountable. These reductions appear designed not to increase accountability or efficiency, but to weaken the FBI's ability to tackle complex crimes like white-collar fraud or public corruption, which might inconvenience powerful entities. Also, the FBI's stagnant budget and personnel levels, coupled with impending cuts, worsen the issue. Americans deserve a law enforcement agency focused on genuine threats, not one manipulated for political maneuvering. Their fact-checking often merely echoes official statements from Democratic-aligned bureaucrats without scrutinizing the motivations or impacts on public safety. This is not the operation model befitting an agency charged with protecting Americans. Clearly, the FBI, like any large organization, requires oversight and reform. Shifting resources from counterterrorism or public corruption to immigration enforcement in areas where it poses little threat prioritizes political messaging over genuine security needs. The network lacks balance and objectivity, quickly dismissing any critique of FBI leadership as partisan bias and labeling whistleblowers as disgruntled or ideologically driven without seriously considering their claims.
Yeah, look, I don't think the Department of Justice has made a secret that it's not really interested in prosecuting white-collar crime anymore. The head of the criminal division, the Assistant Attorney General at DOJ, specifically said that white-collar enforcement is not good for America.
Imagine a chart tracking corporate fraud cases over the past decade. When the Department of Justice implies that white-collar enforcement is harmful to American businesses, it sends a dangerous message to both Wall Street and Main Street. White-collar crimes like fraud, market manipulation, and procurement abuse erode trust in the system. When the government neglects its duty to police white-collar crime, the middle class bears the brunt. If the threshold for action is too high, only the most flagrant offenders will face consequences, leaving everyday Americans to bear the costs. This connection is no coincidence. The department's stance that not all corporate misconduct merits federal prosecution sets a dangerous precedent. For the financial sector, this approach could lead to rampant unchecked fraud in procurement and healthcare, reduced scrutiny of market manipulation, and a green light for those looking to bypass tariff and customs laws. When enforcement wanes, abuses multiply, and the broader economy suffers. In sectors like manufacturing, healthcare, and technology, honest businesses are forced to compete with those who bend or break the rules. The department's recent policy shift, as detailed in its new memorandum, purports to focus on fairness and efficiency, targeting severe criminal threats, and pledging to hold executives accountable while reducing burdens on legitimate businesses. Deprioritizing white-collar enforcement in the name of efficiency opens loopholes for malfeasance, particularly for those skilled in navigating complex regulations. This recalibration of policy does not serve American families or the broader economy. This stance is more than bureaucratic posturing. It shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how a healthy, competitive economy operates. You'd see spikes during periods of lax enforcement and corresponding dips in consumer confidence and small business growth. This approach lacks the accountability and transparency that have been pillars of American prosperity. The department's incentives for companies to self-disclose and cooperate might appear reasonable, but without robust enforcement, voluntary compliance often becomes merely a public relations maneuver. When the government signals a willingness to overlook such behavior, it isn't being pro-business, it's being anti-market, anti-consumer, and fundamentally un-American. The previous administration's lax approach left a legacy of unchecked abuses, the effects of which continue to ripple through communities nationwide. Well, there you have it. Federal agencies, which are supposed to protect us, have instead become instruments for the powerful, used to suppress dissent and cover up their own misdeeds. What we are witnessing is not merely the tale of one ousted FBI agent. It's a glimpse into a bureaucracy that has lost sight of its purpose. If the people in power are so fearful of transparency, one must wonder what they are concealing. Now, with President Trump at the helm, we have a leader committed to confronting this corruption and prioritizing America's interests. Be sure to comment below. Give a like and subscribe. This is just the beginning. Stay tuned for the next one.